Hey everyone, welcome back to the Live Boldly podcast. We're going to dive right in with Eric G today because there's a lot to cover. Grab your journals because this is one of the most fascinating conversations when it comes to human personality, animals, who you are, what you are willing to divulge when you take these tests and be honest with yourself about, or what you are not. So I thank you so much for being here. By the way,
Oh,
let's start with
having
that.
me.
Thank you so much for being here. And I want to dive in with, I always ask my guests, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, your work. And we're going to also step into what got you into this work, because this is actually a very fascinating, this is really fascinating work that you're in. It's also super important. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I maybe it has to do with my personality type. We're
Yes.
gonna get into that, right? I was one of the personality types that maybe growing up, my value system was maybe not the same as the people around me. So I kind of started questioning that and wondering, usually actually questioning myself. And so that basically led me to a lot of studying on personality theory and different archetypes and different ways to differentiate between people. And then after a period of time, I started my own education company, and for about a decade, I used that. I don't want to say used it, but we'd have about 1,000 students a year, and so I kind of experimented and researched at the practical level, and constructed my methodology based on that, or a lot of it based on that. And now I coach. I'm a life coach and a writing coach, and yeah, and I
What
wrote a book.
Well, and so tell us about the book and tell us about this work that you do, because this is where I want to dive really deep into this.
Right. So the book is The Power of Personality, and it's basically a guide to teaching people how to type personality type people. And generally, I wrote it because I think a lot of personality books, it's like the Enneagram, the MBTI, Myers-Briggs, whatever, they have this test in the front of the book that's like, 40 questions, fairly cookie cutter. And then the whole book is based on prescriptions. And I'm like, well, what if you get the test wrong? Or what if people diagnose it wrong? Because, it's just a test. And I think if you don't understand the full methodology, then you're going to have people believing there's something that they're not. And then you have all these prescriptions for them. So I wrote this book to kind of teach people, look, this is the methodology. This is how you understand people better and type them. And ideally, once you understand that, regardless of what you get on the test, you'll be able to identify yourself or other people correctly.
Got it. Okay, so how did you come up with this though? Like how did you when I'm talking about tests and stuff and all these different tests, and I know that there are a lot of people out there right now going, "Okay, but how do people even come up with that? Like what made you come up with this particular test? And then also let's dive further into that, into the animals behind it that you are."
Right. So I started focusing, especially working with kids on an extracurricular level, because with my education company, it was all tutoring after school.
Mm.
When you're tutoring a kid and it doesn't have to do with school per se, and like if you don't have a grade to hang over their head, then you have to motivate them to a certain extent. And I think what I found is the difference between people isn't really these superficial things like extroversion, introversion, or whether you're more talkative or more organized, but it's really like deep down, we have different values. Like everyone prioritizes a core value. And I think those differences are what make us who we are. And I think those differences are the things that we don't necessarily see, or we just assume. We all assume, oh, family's the most important thing. It's like, well, yeah, but how do you value your family? Because people value their family differently. You
Mm.
know, when's the last time anyone heard about Einstein's family? Like
Right.
so. Yeah, and then I started developing that with the students and figuring out what they value because if you have a student who values excitement and they want to like try different things and get really nervous and like they like to get their adrenaline flowing, it's a lot different than a student who values caution and feeling comfortable and feeling secure, and they're going to be motivated at different thing or by different means and methods. So.
That's interesting that you're having these conversations about values with younger kids. How old are these kids? Students?
There, the education company went from K to 18. Me personally, I tend to work anywhere from junior high to adult age. I wouldn't really discuss it with the students per se. I would discuss it with my tutors and my teachers.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So like the example I always like to use, if you have a certain type of personality that likes excitement, and taking risks, then oftentimes teachers who tend to fit into another personality group just by nature of what teachers do, which is great, by the way, they fit into that group that tends to prioritize security and safety. The natural instinct for them to tell that kid who prioritizes excitement is be careful. And that's like the worst thing you can tell anyone, tell that particular student is to be careful. You know, you got to
Right.
tell them to concentrate or focus. And I know those two things are kind of saying the same thing, but the motivation is totally different. Like if you say be careful, you're basically taking away all that kid's risk-taking ability because you're saying, oh, I have to like be careful and me taking risks is not good. Whereas if you tell them to concentrate, they're like, oh, okay, it's okay for me to take risks as long as I'm focused when I do them.
I
So
think this is really important for us to dive into because here's the thing. I feel like when I'm coaching my adults, and I have actually coached and taken teenagers, high schoolers on my retreats, they don't even know. I mean, they might kind of have an idea of what they value, but they don't understand the implications of not honoring the values that they do believe in, right? Or they set their own values aside to focus on other people's values and what's important, then diminishing or dishonoring their own values in the process. And so this is why I was asking, do you talk to your kids about this or did you? Because you're students, because I think it's one of the greatest things that we can do is to start talking to our kids, our students, those people that, you know, perhaps have never had this conversation before about what your values are and do you honor them? What's important to you?
So with my own students, that's definitely part of the curriculum that I use. I guess I could call it a curriculum. That sounds so academic. Um, yeah, like that's something that I do a lot. You know, the funny thing is I tend to be hired as a writing coach. And that's when I really started doing it because I'm realizing like the way I taught writing was to help people find their voice. And
Hmm.
you don't know your own voice unless you know yourself. So that's kind of the angle I took. And then it just got to where a lot of my students like really liked it and were like, oh, this is like changing my perception of what I really like to do against perhaps what my teachers are saying or what my parents are saying or what my classmates are saying. So
And you don't really know yourself until you truly dive into what are your values and what's important to you.
yeah, and why do you do the things you do and thinking about it?
Yeah. And that's also the way that we can break patterns in our life, right? Like by understanding ourselves more deeply and also understanding what's important.
Yeah, I think we get into those patterns because we feel like we have to justify our existence to someone else's values versus our own. And I think it's a lot easier to feel good about yourself when you're doing the things that you truly like to do.
Okay. So, how is this different than Myers Briggs, this test that you created? Let's start there.
So Myers-Briggs is more based on, I don't want to say superficial seems a little biased, but I'd say surface level things like, you know, are someone more extroverted or introverted, or the dichotomy between thinking and feeling, which I know is not necessarily superficial or surface, but it's also very hard to tell. Like, how can you tell someone, oh, you're a more feeling person and this person is more thinking? Oftentimes I got the complaint as I was studying early because I've studied Myers-Briggs quite a bit, especially when I was younger. People are like, well, that doesn't make sense because I'm extroverted in this context and introverted in this context. And I agree. Like I mean, it just totally makes sense that it wouldn't make sense. And so that's why I decided to focus more on what people value because that's how it really manifests. Our personalities manifest based on our values. And then it would show like if I like something that I'm doing and I truly value it, then I am going to be more outward and I'm going to project myself. But you know, my version of extroversion, I guess, would be more like advocating like something that I believe in, maybe going up, not that I'm a preacher, but maybe going up to a pulpit and really like, you know, preaching the word, but it might not necessarily be the extroverted kind of like going on a, you know, taking body shots in Cabo, you know, or doing body shots there. So, you know, it's different for everyone.
It's different for everyone. No, I agree. And I love when you said, what did you say? Something about it makes sense that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes
It's hard to argue. I'm like, yeah, I can't argue against that. So I got to figure out a way where this does actually start making sense. And then obviously working with students, I could really start seeing it where it's like, oh yeah, it's just, it doesn't have to do with the surface stuff. It's more about like why someone does the things they do.
So, Eric, I have this belief that everything in this world starts with an idea. And in order for us to make this idea successful, whatever it is, and this is like pulling it back for a second, anybody can have the idea, right? Like you looked at this and you saw, all right, there's a problem here. It doesn't make sense. And so let's work on creating a solution to it. You had an idea. There are three things that you always need to have. This is what I have found in order for it to be successful: purpose, passion, and play.
Hmm.
Purpose, passion, and play. You have to have purpose behind it, right? People die because they lose their purpose. And passion is that being able to like really step into it and say, this is fun for me. Like this comes from my core value of what is important to create impact. And then you have to play with it. And you definitely did a lot of that. So
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead. No, one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I'm paraphrasing because I'm not German, is from Nietzsche, and he says like true maturity consists in regaining the seriousness one had as a child at play. And I
oh,
always love that because I think of time, think when people are growing up, they're like, you need to act like a quote unquote, I'm using hand quotes, adult.
yeah.
When it's like, yeah, but you just got to find the thing that you really love because when you're a kid, you really are passionate about it and you really do follow through a lot. And it's fun too. So
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I always pull that little girl in within me to come out and play when I'm doing this work. And that's what people always ask me. Like, they're like, "Why do you laugh so much when you're guiding or when you're coaching or whatever?" I'm like, "Because this is fun. If my work wasn't fun, I'd say forget it. I'm out of here. Like, I'll go do something else."
no one wants to listen to a life coach that doesn't laugh and have fun. Like, because no
Right.
one wants to be miserable. Like, why would anyone want to be miserable? Like that,
Exactly.
yeah. I once had a students who they were talking about their grandmother and they're just like, oh, our grandmother's mean. I'm like, well, maybe she's just a little strict. Maybe she's just trying to keep you guys in order. And she's like, no, no. What she tells us when we get in the car is no more fun. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're
What?
pretty mean.
That's pretty mean.
No
Well,
more.
clearly I mean, we could like, oh, that's a whole nother podcast episode of diving into her background as a child and what caused that. Like, come on. Wow. Okay. So I want to dive into the four packs that you have within the test: the gatherers, hunters, shamans, and the smiths. Let's step into that.
Okay, and I divide the packs based on once again their values, their core set of values. So there are four animal personality types within each pack. That's why I call them the packs, and so which makes for 16 types. And so if you are an animal type within a pack, then you're probably going to have a lot of similar values and share a lot of similar characteristics to other personalities within that pack, but might not necessarily get there the same way. So gatherers are the ones, they make about half the population approximately, and they value safety and security. And so I call them gatherers because they would keep the village together. And it's kind of great that we have them because they keep society together. They're the people who make sure that the trains run on time. They make sure that we have enough toilet paper in the house. They are really detail oriented and all the things that you'd think of someone who would be really good at logistics. Hunters. So I know you said you're a peacock, so that's a
I am a
hunter.
peacock.
And
Everybody has a
hunters,
peacock. Does that really surprise you whatsoever?
yeah, they value visceral excitement. So I say excitement, and then people are like, well, that seems so superficial. I'm like, well, no, it just means like they want to get the most out of life and experience the most out of life through their five senses. So
Bam! That's totally me.
yeah, you want to see everything, smell everything, hear everything, and you can see how that would have a sort of a conflict with gatherers who are a little bit more cautious. They're not as risk taking. Um, and then hunters make up about a third of the population. And then the other two don't make, they're kind of small minorities. That would be the shamans and the smiths. Shamans value self-knowledge. So they would be the ones, I always say that, the midlife crisis only applies to a gatherer because they've lived a fairly secure life. And it's only when they're in their 40s, they're like, oh, shoot, like, am I living the life that I want to? Whereas a shaman, they don't have midlife crises because their whole life is a midlife crisis. Their whole life has been like, shoot, am I doing the right thing? Like when they're 5, like, is there something wrong with me? And yeah, so that's what they kind of spend their whole life doing. And then the Smiths spend their number one value is information. So they just seek information at all costs. I used to say knowledge, but then if you say knowledge, then everyone's like, I'm a Smith. And I'm like, no, it's not like that. Like most people don't prioritize information more than, let's say, safety or security. I think the hypothetical I always give and I write about in the book is I just ask people, if you could take an experimental drug, would you test it on yourself to figure out whether it works, even though it could have adverse consequences, like you could go blind. Not to say that a smith would always say yes to that, but they actually would think about it. They'd be like, and they start asking a lot of questions. Whereas a gatherer would definitely be like, are you kidding me? That's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I would never do that. So that's usually how you can tell the difference.
So I just want to like kind of, I'm going to use me as an example here with the peacock. So with the gatherer, because a lot of people seem to think that I am this like massive risk taker. Well, I am a risk taker. I'm not a stupid risk taker. I'm not going to risk my life. Now, the interesting thing about it is that other people, now this is making sense to me as I'm even talking it out, other people that are the gatherers, now I'm thinking like it's probably the gatherers that are sitting there saying to me, would it be the gatherers? I guess, right? The gatherers. They would be the ones that'd be saying, no, you really are risk taking your life. Like in their viewpoint, in their eyes, from their perception, what I am doing is risk taking my own life. I don't feel that way because I've taken so many risks in my life that I know my comfort zone and where I'm pushing it to the point of, okay, this is just flat out stupid versus, no, we're good.
Right. It's great you said that because it is perspective and perception, right? Like for them, the things that you're doing are so foreign in their mind. And if you're so set on your value system, anyone who works with a different value system is doing something wrong. I think, and I'm painting a wide brush. I don't think
Right.
it's like that, but I think that an immature one is definitely going to feel that way. And that's why when I have students that are hunters and young students, I'm always like, so a peacock obviously is hunter. That's why I always say concentrate and focus versus be careful because they're always going to want to take risks. And if they don't learn how to take good risks and be shrewd about it when they're young, when the stakes are low, when the stakes are really high, when you're an adult, then they will take dumb risks and they might do stupid things that risk their life and they might not make the best decisions. But those hunters that really learn when they're young, then when they're older, they take the risks that we need to take, right? Like if you're like a fireman or firefighter, you take risks. You risk your life and someone has to do it. So we want those guys and girls to be like skilled at that. Like we don't want them to be anything dumb. And I think that's why it's so important to recognize at an early age to know where people are going and what they're doing so that they can their skills can be kind of caressed and catered to.
I am sitting here already putting my kids in, oh, that's why he's this person. That's why he's this way. This is fascinating.
Do you have a kid who you're always just like, you should take more risks, go do it, do it, do it.
100%. Can you do that? Can you 100%? Can you take them? Can they learn? Well, there's two questions I have here. First of all, is it possible that people are in one category or one pack because they're not honoring the values that are most important to them? And can they, when they start to honor that value, learn to move from one pack to another?
Yes, I would like the common question I get is, can people change? And I always say people can't change, they can grow. And I think when we don't really move from one pack to the other pack, it's more just didn't really belong in that one, right? It's more like, yeah, it's more like, oh, well, oftentimes it's our parents giving us, not to blame parents, but our parents want, they want to tip off the old block. And so they're giving us these values that they're values. And then we grow up and they're like, oh, wait a minute, like, I'm actually more like this. But I don't think you can, no one really changes.
Right.
But like if you were to have a gather child, I don't know if you do, but that would be the one who you might be like, oh, just take risks, take risks. They can grow. They can take risks. They just have to do it a lot slower and a lot more gradual than a hunter might. Like I always tell this story. I had my teachers for my education company, we would have training every year and I'd get catered food. And there was this one time where I got falafel, I believe, and a gatherer walked up and she's like, what's that? And I'm like, oh, it's like falafel. And she's like, what's falafel? I'm like, oh, well, it's like, chickpeas that are deep fried. And she just like stood there for like 10 seconds thinking if she should put it on her plate. And her friend, who is a hunter, walked up and was like, oh, that sounds great. And she put 2 on her plate. So then the gatherer was like, oh, okay. And she put 1 on her plate. And then 2 years later, because I never got the same food every year. Someone else came up and saw the falafel and was like, what's that? And the gatherer was right behind her. And she's like, that's falafel. It's great. You should try it. And so it's like, once it becomes in the gather world, and they like it, it becomes set and it becomes safe and it becomes secure. And so it just takes a little bit of coaxing, but you can't really push them into it. You got to like slowly ease them into it.
Oh my God, this is so funny. This is I like, where were you 5 years ago when I was really starting to dive into some of this stuff? So I think of my clients, and I think a lot of my clients are gatherers,
Mm.
and I'm the hunter. And so, for example, when I step into the Grand Canyon with them and I don't give them an itinerary, all I say is, we're going to watch the sunrise inside of the canyon. That's the only thing that you're going to know, which is really hard for them because they they want to know, like, okay, well, what about, when are we going to do this, or what when it's with that and whatever. And I always tell them, I'm like, Mother Nature in this Grand Canyon gives us what we need, and we're going to work through it as we work through it. So it really is teaching them how to become the hunter in their life and step out of their comfort zone and to take more risks. And, I'm just like sitting here processing and thinking about all of my clients where they've gone through this. And it's really fascinating because then they come out and they're like, wow, I never knew that I could do this. I've never taken so many risks. I've never stepped into this many relationships in this healthy way, whatever it is.
Right. I
Dang.
think, yeah, no, and it's really important for gatherers, most of all, just because I'm always telling people you got to find your anchor first, right? Find who you
Yeah.
are. So that way you don't lose track of it. And then you can work on and borrow skills from other types. Gatherers generally don't have a problem finding their anchor because since half the population are gatherers and like, let's face it, civilizations, at least, Western civilization's value system is very gather-like. It's safety, security,
Mhm.
things, buy a house. My niece just told me, I asked her what's adulting to her, and she's like, buy a house. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's adulting. Okay. Like, but that's ingrained in a lot of us. So gatherers don't have to like really find their anchor. They kind of know who their anchor or what their anchor is, but they need to get pulled off it, right? Like what you're doing is fantastic, right? It's like taking them and putting them out of their comfort zone and realizing, it's okay. This is how we learn. Because oftentimes they don't do it because they just never really have to until they get to like a time when they're like, shoot, you know what? I need a life coach because I'm not necessarily happy with my job or whatever in my life. And let me self-reflect. And then, I mean, that's where you come in, right? And
Yeah.
show
Wow.
them.
Dang. Okay. So let's talk about the animals under this. You,
Okay.
you're a baboon.
I'm a baboon. Not very flattering. Yeah, I know. I always tell people, hey, it's like people who get beavers. You're like, a beaver, really? I'm like, hey, don't complain about a beaver because I'm a baboon. Like foxes, every fox loves to be a fox. I'm like, fox, yes, I'm a fox. Thank you. But
Yeah. So how do so first of all, for anybody that's like wondering right now, we're going to take just a time out for just a second. If you're wondering about this personality test, it is in the show notes. So go take the personality test. I know that everything is in there. So let's talk about the animals that are underneath these packs. And how did you come up with them? And just like, let's give a few examples.
so I'll use the hunters because that's actually there. So I'll use the hunters as an example. I picked animals that might like people would be able to identify at least some form of representation in terms of like the characteristics and traits. Like if you say someone's a fox, then people know, oh, crafty, clever, shrewd. They kind of are sly and sneaky at their worst, maybe a little shameless. And so a fox would be a type of hunter, but a shark would also be a type of hunter. And you say a shark, people think of like at their worst, narrow-minded, but very focused, killer instinct, blood in the water, attack, attack, attack. And funny if those fit perfectly with hunters, right? Are you thinking of a friend who's a
I am. I sent it to one of them. I was like, hey, do this. And he goes, how am I a shark? And I'm like, you're totally a shark. Like,
right?
how do you say
Even that reaction is great. How am I? Like, like if they were
that?
a bear or something, like the bears are like super kind and differential. They're like, oh, I guess that's true. Yeah, like, like totally different reactions. Um, sharks are tough. My older sister's a shark, so I know them very, very well. Even though, I know she read the book and bought the book, and my niece, who's 9, she FaceTimed me just to tell me that I was wrong about mommy. And I'm like, you know what? I think I have known your mom longer than you have. So I'm noticing my sister didn't say anything. So, yeah, so it's really just like what the animals, like people automatically think of them, and ideally they fit. I mean, none are totally perfect. Like baboon is a little trickier because when I think of baboon, I think of Rafiki from The Lion King. So he's a
Yeah.
big advocate. He's kind of preachy, and that's kind of what baboons are. So that's a few steps ahead, but others like the shark and obviously a peacock. I think we know if you say someone has a peacock personality, I think we know what that means, right?
I
Like,
was stoked.
wow. Yeah. Peacocks and butterflies would be another type of hunter. And so, I mean, not to get too wonky, but when you get into the different packs, you can also separate the four animals within that pack into two sets of two. So foxes and sharks have more similarities to each other than peacocks and butterflies. And so now they're both focused on excitement and getting the most out of life viscerally. But a fox and a shark will get that. They tend to get that through an adrenaline rush, like just like the difference between going on a roller coaster versus the peacocks and the butterflies who get that through consumption. So like yeah, like the difference between going on a roller coaster versus going on like a hike, like a beautiful hike, you
Right.
know, and that would
Right.
be like the difference between the two.
So when
Yeah.
you're talking about consumption, I'm curious about this with myself. So I get my adrenaline rush through consumption. What does that mean?
Oh, what I mean, so I'm sorry. The foxes and the sharks get their excitement through the adrenaline rush.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So like they like taking risks. Well, I mean, hunters like taking risks in general, but they like taking physical risks oftentimes. Like they might love skydiving, bungee jumping. And it doesn't mean the other types wouldn't like that either, but I think peacocks and butterflies would be more likely to like to have travel and have like the best kind of coffee. Or like if you told them, oh, this is the world's most famous coffee, they'd be like, okay, I'm gonna travel there and eat that civet coffee or whatever, you know.
Right. Right. Can you have a little bit of both?
Oh yeah, I feel like, well, if you're a hunter, then you're going to have similarities with the other two. Like, you're going to share a lot of that. But I think when push comes to shove, they'll choose one or the other.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
So could you share the animals that are underneath each one of these groups or each one of these packs?
sure. So in for gatherers, it would be stags, beavers, elephants, and bears. And I think you can kind of tell the stag is like the king or queen because they got that antler crown, and they're like what society tells us, especially with men. Society tells men that they should be this, you know, responsible, structured, serious, aggressive, and self-starting. And then beavers, they make dams, so they're like the hardworking type who does all the step work behind the scenes, very detail oriented. Elephants are herders, so they're like the natural, like I always call them the PTA mom. They don't have to be a mom; they can be a dad too. But you know,
Yes.
I think when we think of a PTA mom, the person who brings people together, and the bear is just like a bear. They are very kind and gentle, and they tend to take in a lot of. They will take a lot of punishment on themselves. But if you mess with someone they love, then watch out. They will just flip a switch and just go absolutely vicious. So those would be the gatherers.
Mhm.
Sorry, this is like a fast forward through everything or
Oh, yeah.
a crash course. And then the shamans, there are the dolphins, pandas, baboons, and humpback whales. Dolphins would be like the community organizer. They'd be the person who runs your local AA, you know. And the panda would be like more like a counselor. They'd be like they like one-on-one. They're probably the best listeners of all the types, like genuinely listen. The baboon, like me, is they tend to be aggressive and loud when they really believe in something, and they'll push an idea aggressively. And then the humpback whales are kind of like the soul of all the types. Like they take things in. They're kind of like the Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, archetypal Joseph Campbell hero type.
Hmm.
They also tend to be a bit of vagabonds. That's how they live their life. And I have a student who's a humpback whale. I'm like, you're just gonna have to be okay being a bit of a vagabond with your life. And he's like, I am totally okay with that. He was a paralegal and he was just like, yeah, I hated it. I'm like, yeah, I would think so. A humpback whale would hate being a paralegal. They would like law because the idea of law and like making changes to society and based on morals and ethics would be appealing. And then they get into it and they're like, oh my God, there's like a lot of paperwork and all these rules. And no, this is terrible. Yeah. And then the Smiths, who seek information, of course. There's killer whales, spiders, chimpanzees, and owls. So
Wow.
the killer whales I described as a CEO type. They're always in charge, or almost always in charge. And then the spiders are more like I call them the criminal mastermind. They're behind the scenes, working the angles. They always have a plan. And then the chimpanzees are kind of like the crazy scientist guy who like she creates different things, like I don't know, Musk or like actual Tesla. And then the owls are kind of like Einstein. I always say that's like he's like the perfect example of an owl. Now it doesn't mean that they're geniuses like Einstein, of course. I have a friend who's an owl, and he's like, just because I'm an owl doesn't mean I'm a genius. It just means that I'm a nerd and I know a lot about fantasy football. So you know that's a big distinction. They just like stuff. They like information. It doesn't matter what it's about, just
Okay,
information.
and then go through the hunters one more time again. We have the
We have the foxes and the sharks,
yep.
and the foxes are like the salespeople. They're like the shameless promoters, and by shameless I mean that in a good way. They're like the perfect hustler, And then the sharks are more like very specific, very skill based, very tools oriented. The first shark I always think of is like Michael Jordan. He's a shark. Like they'll like practice with a tool like for hours on end. And then the peacocks, they're like the natural performers. They tend to like to dance a lot or like move their body. Like even if you're talking to a peacock, they might be moving, and like just for fun. They're like, oh, you're like,
I'm
oh,
always moving.
oh yeah, it's just part of life is moving in their physical space. So they're the most coordinated, or they tend to be the most coordinated. Um, versus the owl, who will just like bump into things because they don't know what's going on in their outside world. And then the butterflies, and the butterflies are like that gentle artist type who kind of likes to go into their cocoon or their, wherever, and then create something beautiful and then show it to people. So
That's fascinating. Now, here's the other question I have. Does this have anything to do with how you create relationships with one another as well? Does
you know,
this,
that, yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
like there
Yeah,
it is.
that's like a big question. I'll be like having a talk like at a company, helping people like work together better. And then at the end, questions, and they're like, yeah, who should I hook up with? I'm like, oh, okay. Let's do that. I mean, it's important, really important. Now, I always like to say I'm not a big believer in the quote unquote soulmate thing. Like I think anyone can be with anyone. But the most important thing is truly understanding them. And I do think there's a consistency with how types get along and how they don't get along. So as long as you're okay, like if you're a stag and you're with a chimpanzee, then you know what? You're going to be like House and Cuddy in the show House. If anyone's ever familiar, that you're going to have that dynamic, and you have to be okay with that. You have to accept that. That the stag is going to have to accept that the chimpanzee's going to do all these subversive things, probably behind their back, and will just spend their whole life trying to poke fun at them and goad them. And then the chimpanzee is just going to have to accept the fact that the stag is going to follow rules and be very structured and organized and really care about their parking space more than they should. So
I
yeah, and
love
so
that.
people are okay with that.
Yeah, it's so funny you brought that show up because I don't watch TV. I don't even have a TV anymore, and I don't even know how to turn. I don't even have to turn it on. Like I've got one. I just don't even know how to turn it on. And that is the one show I loved. And why? Because
Oh,
I loved his personality. I thought he was
oh.
hilarious. I thought it was just fascinating how he moved through this world with the pet personality that he had.
Yeah, it's a fun show. I brought that up too because my father was a chimpanzee and my mother is a stag. So I definitely know that those dynamics very, very well. And it's the same. Like my father spent his whole life just trying to get a rise out of my mom, like every day, just because he thought it was funny. And then she would, of course, reflexively get upset, even though she knows what he's trying to do. But she just does it anyway because that's her natural instinct is to like not like hearing these subversive things and dirty jokes, especially around the kids. And
Right.
we're oh, that's funny. That's funny. It's dirty. It's funny. And yeah. So,
Right. Do
but
you,
yeah, yeah.
so
I'm
many
sorry.
questions here. Do you find that I mean, I think about like narcissists, for example, or like people that have multiple personalities or whatever. Is it do you find that one I don't even know how else to even ask this question, but do you find that one particular animal has more narcissists or jerks or like that they're sociopaths or I just keep going. I could keep going.
With the multiple personality, I haven't, my background isn't in clinical psychiatry. So I don't know about
Right.
that. I haven't had a lot of experience with, I guess it's not whatever it's called now, dissociative
So,
disorder, but in terms of, yeah, I mean, I do think that it's, I have a thing on my site and in the book called deviant roles. And I think when
We're gonna
someone goes bad, they're going to go bad a certain way, but oftentimes the way they go bad is based on their strengths too, right? Like it's based on how, they respond to the world and what they're good at. If you, funny that you asked for narcissism, because I would say like hunters and specifically peacocks might be prone to narcissism, right? Because peacocks are always like, look at me, I'm the life of the party, I'm fun, like, and watch me dance. And they're really great at that. Obviously, when that twists into something bad, then you get that friend who always wants attention and is always dancing at the club, and they're always the last one to leave, dancing on the table at the bar, and we're like, oh, okay, like maybe we should not hang out with them all the time.
right.
But in terms of like sociopathic tendencies, that might fit more with like Smiths, because Smiths tend to be very honest. They tend to not particularly love authority, and they don't tend to respect it. So thus the rules of society they don't tend to follow the rules of society unless it suits them.
Right.
And so they might do things that we might deem close to like what a sociopath might do, where they're like, oh, I can't believe they did that.
Yeah. So I'm not a narcissist.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying all peacocks are
No,
narcissists.
here's what's really interesting about this though, is I did a post on this once. Those of us that have lived through trauma and a lot of crap in our life, or have been in relationships with narcissists who turn the table and say, "Oh, you're the narcissist." I remember when I went to my former therapist, and I was like, am I a narcissist? And she goes, the fact that you even have to ask that question tells me that you're not a narcissist and should tell you the same. And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. And so I just want to clarify this as well, because I did a post on that with one time, and I said, hey, people, if you have to ask if you're a narcissist, chances are you're not a narcissist. And they were like, oh, thank you so much. Right. And so I think that sometimes we hear stuff like that. And I did too. I mean, I read that about the peacock, and I'm like, man, that sounds like a freaking narcissist, right? And I'm like, but I'm not the narcissist. But I also do love to dance, and like, I am loud. It's part of what I do. I stand on stage and speak, for God's sakes. So if I can stand on stage and speak to thousands of people, clearly, like, there is also that, right? And so it is very fascinating, like when you start to think about, well, what does this mean behind it, right? So you got to make it work for you. That's my point.
Yeah, I think our strengths come from I guess, our weaknesses and vice
Mhm.
versa, right? So like, yeah, same thing with a baboon. A baboon's weakness is that we get super preachy and we believe in something so much. And then something else that we believe in comes in and we're like, oh, okay, if we discard that and go into the next thing. And that just seems absolutely ridiculous, right? We're like, oh, I have a new cause. And do I totally understand it? Maybe not. I'm just going to get into it and totally
Yeah.
jump into it. Um, but of course, and that's obviously a weakness, but of course the strength is that when we fully believe in something, then we will try to communicate it as much as we can. And I think it's just important to work. It's important to understand what our personality is, so then we can work on those weaknesses throughout the course of our life.
Yeah, I didn't. So it's interesting about the deviant part, because I didn't fully understand that. And is there anything else that you want to talk to us about with that?
Oh, I guess I could just say like well, the way I write the deviant roles is also meant to be kind of funny. Obviously, it's like it's very satirical. But I also like to use the deviant roles because when you bring up negative traits for people, it's one of the easiest way to type them. Because I think there's oftentimes when you bring up positive traits, there's confirmation bias, right? People, if you tell someone, oh, you're generally naturally athletic, they're going to go back to the time when they played high school basketball and they were the 12th man on their JV team. And they'd be like, that's me. I played, I was a 12th man and I scored 2 points in one game. And I'm like, well, okay, that's not really. I'm talking about natural athletes like, Michael Jordan. So I think when you bring up negative traits, the only time someone's going to go like, oh, that's me is when it actually is accurate. Like I had a student who was a stag, and their deviant role is called the fascist. And when she read the fascist, and I think there's a line in there where like, yeah, the rest of the world should be listening to you because people are idiots and they need to follow someone who's competent. She's like, that's exactly my life. People are idiots and they need to follow me because I know And it's like, yes, see, now I know you're stag because you definitely embrace that. That's not even a negative trait to her, you know? And I think that's why it's important to use the negative traits because generally people only accept it if it's true.
So what's the deviant part to the peacock?
It's literally called the narcissist.
Oh, that's
But you know,
amazing.
you're right. Like you speak in front of thousands of people, like you clearly feel like what you're saying is important. And I think that's where a lot of other personalities, you have to flip them the other way, right? They're so deferential and so scared that what they
Yeah.
have to say isn't important that they can't do that. And then it's almost like the opposite effect where they have a problem of being too deferential. Like I think the bear would be opposites of a peacock. And this is going to sound, I think, oh no, their deviant role is called the mob enforcer, in that they only listen blindly to what whoever they respect says. You know, they don't really think for themselves. And that's a problem too, right? So,
Interesting. There is somebody on LinkedIn, and I don't remember his name, who did this whole article about why some narcissism is okay.
mm,
And yeah, and when I talk to my therapist, my old therapist, and I, like, we dive into a bunch of this stuff. Like we just have these random conversations about it. And she said, you realize every single person has a little bit of narcissism in some sort within them. And I hadn't really thought about that before, and it's true.
yeah,
We
I mean, you can't really learn about yourself unless you think you are really important.
Right,
You're worth all the research to do. So,
right, right. Wow, fascinating. So let's talk about pop culture, can we, please?
sure, I love pop culture.
Let's dive in.
Yeah, let's
Let's
do it.
let's start with Travis and Taylor.
Are you a Travis fan or are you a Taylor fan?
I like them both because
Okay,
here's
well, no, I'm not saying you have to choose. I mean,
no, because Travis being, he's like a Midwest dude, and I'm a total Midwest girl, so
oh, okay.
I like that. And Taylor, I respect what she has done. She has created some serious, amazing stuff in this world.
I mean, I was at a Super Bowl party and I saw like five little girls wearing Travis Kelce jerseys. I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. You know,
Oh,
like
that's
they
cute.
probably do they know who Kelce is? I mean, but anyway, yeah, I would say they're actually fairly similar from my read of them at least. Kelce, I think is Travis Kelce seems a little easier to read. He seems like a peacock to me.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why you like him so much. He was the first person you mentioned. But you know, I mean, it makes sense for tight ends in football and wide receivers to be peacocks, just because peacocks have the best body control. And for a wide receiver or tight end, you kind of have to have a lot of body control versus like maybe a quarterback who has different skill set. Um, and he seems to be very like performative. You know, he likes to dance, you know, like someone like I always think of him, and not that they're both tight ends as well, but Rob Gronkowski. I mean, they're pretty
Hmm.
clearly both peacocks. They like to dance, they have fun. Taylor Swift is a performer. She's a songwriter. I think she's probably a butterfly. And so, funny enough, a butterfly and a peacock are right next to each other in my methodology. They're both hunters. They both take risks. They both like excitement, clearly. Um, and yeah, so they would probably, in this relationship, it seems like it would bode well in terms of having lots of fun. If
Yeah.
you get a
Looks like
peacock and a butterfly, yeah, they're going to have a lot of fun.
they're having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. Okay, let's go into another one. Ryan Gosling and is it Eva Mendes?
Eva Mendes. Okay. Funny enough, I'm not that familiar with Ryan Gosling. Only I am familiar with what he does, but like his personality, I don't really know. But Eva Mendes is great because I think she's a perfect example of like we assume oftentimes we assume that people are gatherers, but for people in the entertainment industry, we assume they're hunters, right? Because it's all
Right.
about risk taking, excitement, performance, a craft, working on your craft. And I think she seems like a gatherer to me just for the life choices that she made, which is totally cool. Like where she's just like, you know what, I don't really need my career. I would like to stop my career and raise my family because that's more important to me. And I'll
Mhm.
let him do his thing because that's important to him. You know, I don't think it was about the money because I think they have a lot of money. So for her, it was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna like I want to spend time with my children. And not to say that other types don't like spending time with their children, but I think when you're a gatherer, a lot of the time spent with your children is making them feel safe. So especially when they're younger, that's like super important. I think when they're older, that's when I tend to get students is when those gathered parents like, oh my God, now my kid, they don't want to be with me anymore, hang out with me, and they're like giving me all this crap and arguing with me all the time. Fix it. I'm like, well,
Right.
okay. No.
I'm gonna be walking around just seeing everybody as animals now.
Oh, as long as you don't see them as baboons and you start accusing them of being a baboon and then they get mad, like I've done in the past.
Do you do that? Do you just like, I would imagine that you just walk around like, oh, that, I bet that person's a that, a that.
You, yeah, I mean, I do it in a fun way because I'm not a big believer in certainty. I think that comes with being a baboon. I'm sure peacocks are not big believers in absolute certainty as well. Um, and so I don't believe in trying to categorize people, but I think it's fun to try to read them because that'll always make me want to understand someone more. And the
Mhm.
more I see things, I'll change my mind. I'm like, oh, I used to think this person was this, but I realized and I learned that the reason why they're doing it is not what I thought, but they're doing it for this reason, or maybe they made this decision. And I'm like, wow, oh, that I've learned a lot more about this person. So I'm changing my impression of them. And I think that's the goal of the book too, is just I think we're gonna be lifelong learners about like fantasy football. We can be lifelong learners about the people around us, right? I mean, that's pretty cool.
That's very cool. I told you that my entire family's coming this week for my son's graduation, and I am having every one of them take the test, and we're going to sit down. It's Mother's Day on Sunday. I can do whatever the heck I want, right? So this is going to be
Yeah.
perfect. And we're going
Yeah,
to sit
that's
down
that's their gift to you.
and have this is the gift to me and have a conversation about this because it is really, really interesting. It's very fascinating to me. Are there any other last things that you would like people to know, that information that you want to give them? Anything that we didn't touch on?
No, just a reminder, if you want to learn more about yourself, please buy the book, The Power of
Oh,
Personality. And if you want to learn more about other people, that'd be also great.
100%. And where can they find it?
They can find it online, anywhere you buy books. I guess that's what they always say, Amazon and Bookshop and Barnes and Noble. Yeah, anywhere you can buy books, they can order it.
Highly
And
suggest you guys go get this book because it's so good. And this was such a great conversation.
yeah, it was a
Thank
lot
you.
of fun.
So much fun. So much fun. Thank you so much. And where can people find you?
On social media.
Mhm.
I'm the worst at social media, but you can find me at the Power Personality. I think believe that's my Instagram handle is the Power Personality, and I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. People just search for Eric G, and you'll probably find me. Um,
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on, and we'll have to have a follow-up conversation at some point. What if we brought somebody in and actually did like a jam session with somebody about their
yeah.
personality?
We
Can
could
we do
type
that?
we could just type them and talk about what problems they're having and what good things are coming about
Oh
because
my
of it.
gosh.
That'd be fun.
Okay. I've done this with my former therapist as well. So if any of you are listening to this and you're interested in it, send me a DM, go into my Instagram or send me an email, sarah@sarahschultenkrantz.com. If you want us to sit in with you, even just for a 15-minute jam session, because I do shorts every other week, and we can dive in with them and help them with something. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Just don't get mad if you're a baboon because baboons are very cool.
Oh, so is a peacock.
Yeah, oh, cool. Peacocks never get mad. They're like, yeah, I'm a peacock. All right, look at my tail feathers. Watch
Yeah,
me shake my tail feather. Yeah,
exactly. All
yeah, that's
right,
a cool one.
everyone. Thank you so much. I appreciate having you on, and more till next time.